Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the EPC, and thank you very much for making it after lunch. I know that sometimes it can be a little bit complicated, but thankfully it's not sunny outside, so I'm sure that this is still the most interesting thing to do in Brussels nowadays. So I would like to personally thank you for that. I wanted to give like a very 1 minute introduction about who we are, what we do, and why we're here. Because certainly the most interesting thing of the discussion is going to be like what my co-panelists will be able to say today. My name is Andrea Rodríguez, and I'm the digital policy analyst of the European Policy Center, which I'm not sure if this is the first time you come, but we are one of the biggest think tanks in Brussels. We're covering like different policy areas, and my team is the European Political Economy team, and we're working across like many topics around political economy and also like digitalization. This is an event that we are organizing in collaboration with the Vodafone Institute. So I also would like to thank the Vodafone Institute for like partnering with us to have this conversation. And just a little bit of what have we done on this topic. When I was like preparing for input remarks this morning, I saw that in fact we have been working on the digital single market for more than 10 years at the EPC. And interestingly enough, I came across a study that the EPC commissioned back in 2013, which looks like ages ago when it comes to digital. And in that study, it forecasted that the digital economy will add up to, will represent around 4% of Europe's GDP by 2020. And also, just by digging a little bit deeper in like more recent figures, a study by the European Central Bank in 2021, middle of the pandemic, actually said that it was not 4%, but 6 point something percent. So I think that really represents the importance of the topic and how difficult it is really to grasp the opportunities. Just a little bit of like more numbers. There was another study that mentioned that digitalization could unblock 1.8 trillion euros, which I think it's an amazing figure. And sometimes you need to take this type of enormous figures with a little bit of caution, but at least it shows that this is a promising topic, and therefore speaking about the digital single market shouldn't be like a topic that we just like vaguely come across, but rather one of the priorities that we should put at the center. So with this brief input remarks, I would like to present my panelists today, the speakers that we have joining us this afternoon. First, we have Amaryllis Verhoeven. She's head of digital transformation of the industry unit at DG Grow European Commission. We have Sebastiano Toffaletti, who's Secretary General of the European Digital SME Alliance. We also have Ben Wreschner, who's Chief Economist and Global Head of Public Affairs at the Vodafone Institute. David, I always say David, but I know it's David Frautschy, Senior Director for European Government and Regulatory Affairs at the Internet Society. And lastly, who will be joining us in a moment, because she will be joining the panel a little bit late, but she will definitely make it. Miapetra Kumpula-Natri. She's a member of the European Parliament, and she has been a key figure in key digital files. So I would like to welcome all of you to the EPC, and I hope this is not the last time. There is always more room for collaboration. And with that, Amaryllis, I would like to give the floor to you. So to hear your thoughts on the digital single market and how Europe has advanced.
Okay, well, thank you very much for your opening remarks. Yeah, as I was already introduced, my name is Amaryllis Verhoeven. I'm here from the European Commission, and I am working indeed on the digital transformation of industry. And there, of course, we see the single market as a big, big, big lever to make the digital transformation of Europe's economy happen. And I'll give you a couple of things that we are trying to do. I've been looking at one of the questions that I got from you. And the question that I've been looking at is, how can we use the power of the single market to really make our economy more digital? And what is it we have been doing? What is it we're doing? And that I will be very briefly presenting. I will not be exhaustive. As you say, it's now 10 years we've been working on what we call the digital single market. Let me first start by saying that actually there is nothing mysterious about digital single market. Yeah, it's basically about making the single market work, including for digital companies. Yeah, and using the power of the single market to make basically the transition to digital absolutely happen. So I've always personally not been a big fan of the term digital single market as such, because it's sort of meant or sounded as if we're talking about something different than the single market, whereas really the single market is at the core of these efforts. If you think about a single market, what does it mean to you? The first thing that usually springs to the mind of people is single market means conditions of a national market, but at a European scale. It means basically level playing field, predictable rules, single set of rules for everybody, no barriers within Europe. That is its original meaning. And we believe and we think, and we're actually convinced that this is still a very important lever for our companies, especially in the context of a digital transformation. And with that in mind, we have been working on a lot of pieces of legislation, some might say too much legislation in the digital field. And then everybody's immediately thinking about DSA and DMA and Data Act and all these novelties. But frankly, there's always also been an other effort which has been as important, and that is making sure that our acquis, the single market acquis that we have, is also fit for purpose in the digital age. Very important. I'll give you one example. An example of a piece of legislation which is still pending in front of the co-legislators. We hope still to have the trilogues finished within this mandate. That is the upgrading of the Product Liability Directive. Product Liability Directive is one of the masterpieces and cornerstones, but it dates back from the 80s. And at that time, products were all but smart. And now products are smart, and they're increasingly smarter. And value chains are global. And platforms play an enormously important role in the way our products are being marketed. So we undertook a wholesale effort to evaluate and then upgrade the directive. And that work is still going on. And I think as long as we don't get that right, basically make sure that our basic core acquis, the pillars of the single market, are responding to the needs of the digital world, we're off target. So I really hope that with the PLD we will make it. I'm very confident we will make it. Voilà, that's just one example, but a very illustrative example here. Second thing that comes to my mind, single markets as a powerhouse, powering digitalization is actually the way we govern the single market. Because there is a whole acquis out there. Level playing field also means that administrations shouldn't be recreating barriers that we try to do away with through uniform legislations. And that's where I see an enormous power of digital tools. E-government is also mentioned in the digital decade. Use digital tools consistently in order to make the single market work better, especially for small and medium-sized enterprises. And in that context, I just wanted to flag one initiative. It's the Single Digital Gateway. What is that? That is a one-stop shop access to information, to assistance, but also to administrative procedures online in order to better serve SMEs, notably in a cross-border context, SMEs and citizens. We just issued an implementation report, and actually this morning there was a whole breakfast meeting organized by the SME intergroup of the European Parliament devoted to that, because investing in digital can also be a tool to make actually the market a better place for our companies. Third point, availability. Big buzzword of the single market at 30 years. Yeah, we don't just want a level playing field. We want to create a positive environment where our businesses are effectively empowered. And that also means availability. In the first place, access to data. Yeah, you know, the data economy, in order to unlocking the value of data, very important. We've been working on a set of pieces of legislation in order to get there. All that has been adopted. But now the very important work which is still going on, and which I strongly believe is the creation of the data spaces. bundling the data, making these data available so that companies can use that data in order to build new innovative business models. And we do that in virtually all the ecosystems. Recently, now in the summer, for instance, for the tourism ecosystem, you might think tourism is, what has that to do with digitalization? Well, a lot of tourism companies can actually benefit from big data and data analytics in order to predict tourism flows, for instance. Authorities can benefit from that in order to make those tourism flow manageable. So this is a sector where we don't immediately think technological. This is not about chips and whatever, but this is a sector that stands to benefit, and data spaces can help. And that's just one example, because we have a lot of data spaces in various places, and that's still the beginning of the work. The data spaces are not there yet. It still will require some time. Fourth, access, availability. We are the years of skills. And I hear it from all companies. Skills. Give us skilled labor. Our workforce is aging. Europe has an aging problem. And what about the younger generation? Give us people who know digital skills. And that is much more than being able to, work on a computer. That is a lot more. And for that reason, we have been investing in the so-called Pact for Skills, which are basically initiatives whereby we try to bring stakeholders together, and we also make some funds available so that they can do projects that help in sectoral spaces to help the skilling become a real reality. And for instance, we have now the Pact for Digital Skills, which is responsible for quite some training. Hopefully that can help. Fifth point, still on availability, making sure that inputs are available. We can all talk about digitalization, but for instance, if you don't have chips, you can forget about digitalization. Yeah? And even if you have chips manufacturers, you might still have a problem with, for instance, batteries, the batteries that you need for the digital green transition if you don't have access to raw materials. So a lot of the focus of the Commission has been also in making these inputs, strategic, critical inputs available in a context of geopolitical tension. That's the whole debate about supply chain resilience. That's the whole debate about economic resiliency. And that's where we have been coming up with quite some initiatives in order to address concrete bottlenecks. But I can assure you also here, probably, we are only at the beginning. Because now the Commission has committed to work very concretely together with the industry in order to monitor all the strategic supply chains, understand where are the bottlenecks, and then address them, whatever the bottlenecks are. There might be trade barriers, there might be what have you, yeah? And then last but not least, sounds very obvious, but it is a powerful tool still. Where we are as a European Commission, we can bring players together. And bringing players together using our convenience power is a powerful tool also to boost the digital transition. And with that in mind, we created the so-called transition pathways, which are basically pathways where we agree with all the sectoral players in a given ecosystem on what are the priorities if we want to digitalize. But also more down to earth, we have launched an initiative, and I'm looking at Sebastiano, whereby we promote matchmaking between, for instance, digital SMEs and non-digital SMEs to make digitalization happen and to make sure also that this digitalization happens on the basis of the services provided by companies made in Europe. Digitalization should not mean, as a small player, you sell out to the bigger ones. We should harness the potential also of the smaller ones. So these are 7 initiatives that just sprung to my mind. Is this an exhaustive list of what the Commission is doing? No, by far not. but these are 7 initiatives or 7 work streams that are close to my heart, close also to my business. So I've been a little bit self-serving here in my speech. You will apologize for that. Thanks a lot.
No, thank you very much. I really liked what you said about evaluate and upgrade, because I think that pretty much summarizes all the initiatives that are like taking part nowadays. So when you were speaking about skills, there is an evaluation we're lacking, therefore we need to upgrade, we need to improve. When you were speaking about input available, it's about evaluating what we have, what we're lacking, and how we can improve. So I think that this 2 words really much summarize like all the spirit of like the different initiatives that you're that from the European Commission are happening right now, because at the end of the day, as you mentioned, this is something that is like vital for Europe's future and for Europe's future and present competitiveness in global markets. So I think that since you mentioned Sebastiano, it's only natural for me to give the floor to you. So the floor is yours.
Thank you, Andrea, and definitely thank you also for organizing this interesting conversation. Perhaps I'll start precisely from what Amaryllis said. So we try to keep a certain flow in the conversation. And I like the fact that she started by saying that the market is a big lever, big lever for digitalization. And you concluded more or less by saying that the Commission wants to harness on the potential of the digital SMEs to make this digital transformation happening. And in the same direction, I wanted to present a little bit what we believe is important now for the single market and what is the state, especially in the digital ecosystem. Indeed, digitalization is happening and we are in the digital revolution, if you like, and many SMEs are benefiting from different options they have in websites, marketplaces, e-commerces, software for optimization, for efficiencies, ERMs, CRMs, and all sorts of acronyms of different software that that exist that will make companies better and more efficient. And as Amaryllis said, there are different ways to go into that transformation. And we believe, companies should have as much as possible sovereignty over the solutions they choose, because the more you control the technology, the more you can generate value out of that technology. If others control technology is not just a commodity. It becomes more and more close to the core of the creation of the value in every company, no matter what sector you are. And so there are indeed in the single market several, success stories. Think about what we have seen in the area of fintech or e-payments, where you have, very nice, very good startups, very good smaller companies that have grown and provided really interesting services, making our life probably better, benefiting from the single market. But the same you can think about happens in things like e-health, where you have, innovative companies that invent based on the power of data, as you said. They can invent very useful things using, for instance, AI to predict cancer or to cure diseases. So the opportunities are absolutely there, but also in traditional sectors. Think about the agriculture, and in there many startups and SMEs can innovate. But what we always say is that why is this also important? Because we think a different model of digitalization of technologies is possible. A model which is more open and pluralistic, as opposed to models that are essentially proprietary and vertically integrated. When you have a pluralistic model, you have layers of technology on which many different players can innovate and can propose different things, and the pace of innovation is much higher. Consider that everything that we have in these devices, which are one of the most innovative things that we have in our pockets, yes, they are probably owned by companies and they are under proprietary systems, but they've all been invented thanks to open source. Open source means that there are crowds and crowds of developers which independently see what others do and improve what others do. So the pluralistic model is the base of the digital revolution, is the base of the innovation we have had in the single market and beyond. And this is the role, we believe, of the digital SME. So the more we have open markets, the more we can have, a more competitive economy and a faster pace of innovation. Think what Apple did when they invented the smartphone. Basically, they started generating value out of those independent companies that develop apps. They just make sure they had a good marketplace, right? Where everybody could innovate. And of course, Apple was and is still, getting a lot of advantages from it. And this is perfectly fine. Although, we now have the DMA and things are getting a bit more corrected, so to say. But the question is, in the internal market, why did we not do this? Why did we not take advantage of these opportunities? Think about the automotive sector. And I've been looking at them for years. And I say, look at the digitalization of the cars, of the automotive sector, which is traditionally a strong European sector. Do you think they ever understood that by allowing independent companies to work with their data, they could create better cars, more innovative cars, many more services? No, on the opposite. If you look at BMW, Mercedes, and you name it, all the companies, what they try to do say, no, the data is mine. I only can play with the data. No independent company can play with the data. If you, the consumer, even if when you buy the car, you try to give your data to an independent company, we will certainly not guarantee the car any longer. So it's your problem. You have manipulated the car, and therefore it's not covered by our guarantee. So you see the different approach. So you have smart companies like Apple, which understand the value of the independent companies, the independent innovation, and our companies, our traditional strong companies, don't understand it. In our system, what should we do? Just to go towards the conclusion, in my opinion, there are different options there. Okay, should we hope that our industry does it alone? Should we impose it as a government? Obviously, we are not the US nor China, so we have a different model. So we don't impose it, and unfortunately, we don't have the industry leaders that the US has. So our only model is to work together. We need strong government together with strong industry in partnership, and together we can do things, but we need people with a vision. We need to understand where we stand in this digital revolution. And when industry doesn't understand something, then we need strong government who comes in. Government has been extremely, I would say, shy in many occasions. Lately, I'm very happy the Commission is taking a very proactive approach, especially also on the European, but also on the global scale, with regulation, trying to pave the way for a new space for Europe in this digital revolution. The Data Act that you just mentioned and you asked about, Andrea, is a perfect example. It is the first time the government really takes a very proactive approach and says, okay, an SME that owns a device, they must have the right to control the data they generate through this device. It's not going to be personal data, it's going to be only machine-generated data. But if I am the owner of a device, I must have the right to harness this data, because that is where you have the independent innovation happening. And that is obviously where the incumbents want to control and prevent others, the independent parties, from innovating. So in a nutshell, it's the public and private partnership that really can bring us forward and take the full benefits out of this single market.
Thank you, Sebastiano. I would like to summarize a little bit your points, because I think that you really brought up key issues to right now to the table. You brought up the issue of control, but you also touched upon the issue of governance and of the issue of competition and the issue of access to data. And I think this is after Amaryllis' intervention, you set like the foundational stones of what's the vision, what's the future. And then it was very interesting how you incorporated these elements into what would be the right elements for the SMEs to thrive in a European ecosystem, which leads me to our next speaker, because Ben, you come from Vodafone, which is one of the biggest or most important companies right now operating key infrastructure for like the digital single market. So I think that I would very much be interested in knowing what's your position, or what do you think of like right now all these initiatives that have been brought up to the table, and what do you think are the main challenges looking ahead?
And thank you, EPC, for hosting this event in conjunction with our Vodafone Institute. I don't work for the Vodafone Institute, by the way, from your introduction to me. I just work for Vodafone Group, but nonetheless, thank you very much. Look, I'll try to build on a few of the things that I've heard in a slightly random order. But first, if I maybe a little bit of an anecdote, we talk about the digital single market. Now, I have to be careful here. So we're discussing before this panel started about the gender balance in the room, right? So this is heavily skewed gender balance in this room. And I was going to give an anecdote about football. But you know what? We just had the Women's World Cup. Football is no longer dominated by men anymore. So I feel I can confidently talk about football in a room predominantly populated with the women. But I always found it quite funny. There was the major European tournament. It's called the European Champions League. And the irony of it being called the European Champions League is it's only 3 words, and none of the 3 words is actually correct. So it's European, but actually it covers countries who are not inside Europe. It's called champions, but actually it covers teams that are not actually champions. And it's called the league, but actually it's a cup. It's not a league. I mean, there's bits of it which are a league, but it's an irony that you set up something which has 3 words, and each of the words is incorrect. And digital single market, I think it is a little bit of where I come from on those 3 words, because as Europe, we are not particularly digital. We are certainly not single. And unfortunately, we're not really a market. And I want to focus on the last one first, because I think there's been an over-temptation, especially in the part of the digital ecosystem where Vodafone operates, of not allowing the market to do its magic. And we as a company, but I think also with European values, we still believe in the primacy of the market to determine outcomes. Yet there's been a bit of a fallback and a sort of a knee-jerk always to say, if something isn't quite working, let's find a regulatory solution instead of let's try to find a market solution. Now, I don't open up some old wounds, but we talk about roaming. For me, that's a classic example. So whether or not one believes that in a single European market there should or shouldn't be roaming charges, leave that to one side. If one believes that there shouldn't be, I can sign up to that. Is the answer to regulate as if there is a single market and therefore you regulate that there should be no roaming, or say actually slightly harder work? Let's work out what the barriers to this single market are. Let's eliminate the barriers, and then there won't be roaming charges. Now, that probably takes too long, politically not acceptable, but it's just an interesting mindset that we want outcomes which are consistent with the single market, or a market, and not prepared to do the harder work to create the market conditions, fall back to regulatory solutions. And I think it's also slightly telling in, again, I'm playing on words, like you said I'm the chief economist, but I'm talking about words here instead of numbers, which is not my sweet spot. But we have in Europe, the regulation of our sector is done by national regulatory authorities. Now, I remember hearing Sebastiano, some of you may know, the former head of ARCEP, the French regulator. He once said in a speech, probably not very far from here, that we shouldn't be called regulatory authorities. We should be called deregulatory authorities, because that's what Europe needs now. And I believe that words are really important. And when you tell someone you're a regulator, your instinct is, well, if I'm doing my job, I'm regulating. If I'm not doing my job, I'm not regulating. It's interesting that in the USA, we don't necessarily believe the USA is a perfect market, but it's not the telecoms regulator, it's the Federal Communications Commission. So people like the word commission, it's a softer word. But it's part of the psyche. How do we create a market, not through always regulating, but by solving barriers to the market working, and then being absolutely clinically clear, when should governments, when should regulators intervene? It's in the event of market failure, in the event there are externalities. So where there is a private benefit from sharing data, which is not matched by the social benefit of sharing data, there, government should intervene and say, yes, you should be sharing data. If we can solve cancer quicker because you're sharing data. That's where governments step in and impose those obligations, or the facilitation of those data sharing for companies. So I think it's really important when we're sort of looking at the sector or the digital more broadly to remember the primacy of market in terms of driving Europe forward. And why is this so important now? Because when it comes to digital, this is now looking ahead, not looking back. This is critical for European competitiveness. I mean, it's a bit of a cliche in this city now, but it is a fact. Competitiveness is at risk. The global economy is now digital. We talk about the digital economy, you mentioned it earlier. It's almost like saying 50 years ago, who's part of the electrified economy? This doesn't make sense anymore. The economy is digital. It's everywhere. It underpins everything we do. There is no digital economy. It is just the economy. And if we're not digital, we're not going to have an economy. And that's why what we need to go forward, having all of the elements of the Commission's digital decade targets, all moving in sync with each other, is so critical for the future competitiveness of Europe, but also the social quality of Europe as well. And you referred to, Andrea, at the beginning, numbers, various studies which looked at the different potential economic benefits of digitalization. So in the spirit of our numbers bigger than your number, we actually did commission a study about 3 years ago, I suspect, where we looked at the DESI index, which is obviously the index which the Commission produces to assess the level of digitalization across a number of different parameters in each member state. And we got Deloitte to estimate what would happen to the European economy if every country reached a score of 90 on the DESI. Now, this is a bit of a strange piece of economic analysis because the DESI is actually a dynamic index. So the targets move. So you can't really do that piece of work properly. But doing it in a static context, we came up with 2 trillion of economic value for everyone getting to 90 on the DESI index. Whether that's the right number or not, it's inevitably the wrong number, but it directionally tells you how much value it's taken. That was about 3 years ago. That number has just increased. It's getting more and more important. So we see the value of this. We as I said, the digital decade policy targets were very similar, and really to some of the elements you touched on. We need to move in sync with skills, with digitalization of public services, with the innovation on quantum computing, all of this. But you won't be surprised to hear me say, underpinning all of this, we have to have the right infrastructure. It's not a surprise. And look, it is not even controversial anymore. Europe is lagging behind on the critical infrastructure. We see on 5G, the data source that I used most recently is OpenSignal. They have a benchmark of 5G from 56 leading countries. It doesn't include China. The data is not available, something about non-data sharing there. But if you'd include China, it would clearly be right at the top of that benchmark. But it is sad that in the top 10 countries on both availability and speed, Europe doesn't feature. Europe is heavily skewed to the lower end of this 5G global benchmark. And that is a problem for European business, for European economy. And what we see the risk of now is what we've seen basically in the consumer internet, this concentration of value. I mean, Sebastiano, you talked about Apple and open source, but the reality is it might be open source, but it's not really. And the value has all been concentrated in 4 or 5 very, very significant companies. I was at a GSME event last night where Miapetra, the CEO of Telefonica, described the largest OTTs as the 4th biggest economy in the world. I mean, that's the level of their market capitalization. They are dwarfing member states. They are dwarfing countries. They are so big and so powerful. And that, in our view, partly, not entirely, but partly due to the fact that within our digital ecosystem, we have been, the connectivity layer has been the one area which has been singled out for this regulation, intervention, whether it's artificially lowering barriers to entry, whether it's artificially raising the barriers to exit, and then it's extracting as much as you can when you're stuck in the middle. The connectivity layer in Europe is now fragmenting. It's fragmenting in front of our eyes. It's not a happy story, I'm telling you. With Vodafone, we have retreated from a number of member states. Deutsche Telekom retreated from a number of states. Orange retreated from a number of member states. Telefonica, only now present in Germany and Ireland. This is not the direction we'd want to be going in if there really was a single market for connectivity. The conditions are not consistent across member states. When you try to achieve synergies and scale benefits across member states, it's not there. There's too many localization rooms around how network is deployed, where you have to locate some of your assets for security reasons. And the consequence of this is a fragmenting connectivity sector, which is not able to pull its weight within the overall ecosystem of digital. And the risk for Europe of that is these locally placed companies that provide the connectivity cannot pull their weight against the larger tech players. And it's probably too late for the consumer internet, but for the industrial internet, which will drive European competitiveness for the next 10, 15, 50 years, if that same concentration of value, which will take place to those companies that can innovate the fastest, if that same thing happens on the industrial internet that happens on the consumer internet, then Europe has got a serious problem in terms of its competitiveness globally. So our plea for the European Commission, for all of the institutions here, is to really focus on those digital decade policy targets to ensure that every piece of policy is all geared towards how do you create something, not how do you regulate something, how do we create something? And then let's really catch up on 5G, because we're not going to lead on 5G. Those days have been lost. And let's lay the groundwork for the future innovation, 6G, but the industrial internet that will determine the successes of all the SMEs, all the medium-sized businesses, all the large businesses in Europe. Let's make sure that we have the underlying critical infrastructure in Europe to take Europe forward as it needs.
Thank you for giving a forward-looking view of what would be for you the desired outcome of this conversation, not only, but like of the next few months and years, like here in Europe. I think that this, after all these ideas gathered, it's only about the right time to give the floor to you, David, to hear what your impressions are.
Okay, thank you, Andrea. First, I would like to introduce my organization. I work for the Internet Society. So for those who don't know us, we were created 30 years ago by some of the internet pioneers. Our mission is to protect and defend the internet. And I think the internet needs to be protected because we are seeing policies around the world that attack the model of open, globally connected and trustworthy internet. And not only policies from governments, but also proposals from companies. I also want to explain how we are funded. We don't talk for big tech, and there is an ongoing debate that my colleague here, Ben, has talked about. It's called, some people call it fair contribution. We don't like the word fair here on this debate because it seems something unfair would be happening, which is not the case. This debate is being described as a competition between big tech and telcos. We don't take sides for any of those players. We take sides for the internet itself, because that is our role to defend and protect the internet. The way we are funded is because 85% of our budget comes from the .org domain. We manage the, a part of the Internet Society manages the income from .org domains around the world. So that gives us total independence on what we say and what we do. We also have a small percentage of organization members, being Ethno, the Association of Telcos, part of our membership, and some of Big Tech also part of our membership. But the fact that we are funded by the .org, mostly by the .org domain, gives us total independence on what we say. So one of the works that we have done is we have developed an internet impact assessment toolkit. We like to promote this as a way to analyze policy proposals that come from governments or corporations that might impact on the way the internet works. We fully allow any stakeholder that wants to use this tool. We train how to use it for free, and we would like all stakeholders to be analyzing policy proposals around the world, because it provides for a lens to make an analysis of a policy proposal and determine whether the impact on the internet is negative or not. And it also provides the right arguments to explain policymakers what needs to be changed in order to foster and open a global internet. So the panelists before me have spoken about SMEs, the tourism sector, exchange of data, how important digital is for the global economy. And it is true, but that won't happen if the internet, that is infrastructure below that, if it's not a healthy internet, if it's not there, if it's not open, if it's not global, it will not deliver. So every tool can be there ready, but if the internet is not fit for purpose, then it will not deliver the promise of those benefits to the global economy. So we need this healthy internet to be there. And as I said, there are some policy proposals that are not fit for purpose. You mentioned before the need to have a pluralistic model of digitalization, one that allows for code developers to have ownership. And then we see the Cyber Resilience Act with some responsibilities for coders that would be liable for upgradings or for harms made with the pieces of code that they design and they deliver and they put for free in the market. The internet was mostly created by this kind of free code. And we think that this part of the Cyber Resilience Act should be amended to ensure that coders are exempt of this kind of liability. These not all kinds of coders, of course, but these people who make small pieces of code and put them for free for free use in the market. But then you've spoken about the importance of infrastructures and how you see in your business, how you see a mismatch between the need to build secure and fast infrastructures available and fast ones. And the digital decade includes some targets for coverage and speed. And this is the excuse that telcos are putting on the table again after this debate had been already discussed a decade ago and rejected. They bring again this proposal from big tech to contribute to the deployments. We are very much against this proposal. We've seen this happening in South Korea. We've run our impact assessment toolkit into the legal proposal or the legal obligations in South Korea, and we see how this has negative impact on the internet ecosystem, on the consumer, high prices, reduce of amount of players or increase of the dominance of the current players. And South Korea, that was an OECD model on broadband deployments, now is on the low end of the charts on issues on specific variables like latency, which is a disaster for the consumers. So my message is to ensure that all policy proposals that could affect the internet are being analyzed through a lens like ours that we offer for free to use and we train people to use. Because otherwise, legislators with good faith, most times with good faith, they are putting forward proposals that have a negative impact. And it is important to analyze from different angles, including the internet, the same way we are already doing from an environmental impact point of view. We need to analyze that policy proposals do not affect the internet on a negative way. So I'll leave it there and open for questions later if there are any.
Thank you very much, David, for doing that very comprehensive recap of what are the challenges that you see in recent regulation. I would like to welcome to the panel Miapetra. She's joining us from the European Parliament, and just to recap some of the points that were raised in the input remarks of the previous panelists. We have had a vision, let's say, from the Commission of what what is the direction for Europe, or at least, I mean, right now with this landscape of different regulations that have been emerging, especially during this commission term, that I couldn't agree more. It has been really intense. Then we have had like Sebastiano just shedding some light on how these initiatives needed to take into account the voice of SMEs as well, to improve control, to try to come up with a pluralistic view of the single market, which I think it was a very interesting term, and also how important it is to ensure that there is enough access to data, which is also a point that Amaryllis, you brought up, and then you mentioned the data spaces, and we're huge fans of data spaces at the EPC because we're working very actively on that realm. So I'm happy that you definitely brought it up. I'm also happy that Ben, you brought up like this forward vision view in which you try to ask the audience of what would be the perfect balance between like markets and regulation, which I think that's the key question. And then it really depends on like which jurisdiction you go. It's balancing towards one way or another, and also that clear message that you send saying that we need to focus on the digital decade targets and we need to catch up on innovations such as 5G. And it's also very interesting. And as someone who has like written her thesis on quantum computing, and the fact that you mentioned that made me really happy, because certainly like it's emerging technologies as well as a key aspect that we need to start looking more in depth. You mentioned also 6G for the industrial internet, and that was a very interesting addition. And lastly, David, you also picked up on several points that were mentioned before, and then you tried to just like give that comprehensive overview, as I mentioned before, of several challenges with some specific messages, such as what about coders, and what about like open source, which is not really open source, and a variety of multiple challenges. So I think that with this little recap, it couldn't be like a best time to welcome you to the panel, Miapetra. And I wanted to ask you, from your perspective, considering the role that you have also played in key digital files during this term, what is your perspective on the digital single market? What are the challenges that you're seeing coming ahead?
Yes, the title says the single market, but at the moment I'm more worried about the global markets, that where Europe lies in that one. So that has been speeding up. That's what we do. How should we deliver? And then it really goes from the hardware, the software. If I look that way. Also, I think my second term now soon ending. The first term was more this hardcore roaming, 5G, all the how to get the spectrums and that one, so that have access for everyone on the internet. And now we are what's happening inside the platforms, AI, Data Governance Act, Data Act, and all that. So that is actually the speed we're going. So I'm not maybe the one to say that I know exactly what would be the next 5 years to be, because it was a big change from infrastructure to the content. At least there is a lot to do the completion, what has been agreed now politically, what the legislation to take it. For example, I love to sit next to the SME Europe. Thank you for the cooperation for the Data Act to put it in place, because now we are shaking the tree very soon that the data is there. There will be apples coming down like in the fall. It's happening. And I'm not now sure if everyone is there with the baskets to take it and deliver. So I asked Commission to help also his members to be able to deliver, to get more economical activity in Europe. That is number one for me in digital single market. So there is a lot to do. So it's not that once I finish as a legislator that the thing is completed. It's a start for the new era with the new legislation, and that is very important. Then I come straight from the another panel discussing whether AI Act is very much late. I said thank you a lot. Thanks a lot. It's very much late. When Commission proposed it in February 22, it was a sad February on that, but then also AI Act was not welcomed at all. It was not finally, it was more that you will kill the innovations. And then suddenly you see the biggest, most beautiful CEOs in American newspapers requiring stop innovations because it's getting dangerous. And I read carefully a couple of times the State of the Union speech. that extinction might happen with AI. So now people say you are late, and we are the first in the world. So let's do something good out of that one too. And my guess is that we will have to go more nitty-gritty on different sectors: AI at work, AI and arts, on the copyrights, AI there, because it is also. And not like a statistics that you cannot regulate statistics, that I had academic calls with the specialist when the AI proposal was first made. What is AI in the end? But it's more like a medicine to me, that I want the society take responsibility. I do not want to give a consent every single time that I need to eat medicine. I don't like to know the formula and chemistry behind it. And I don't want to read the long books that when the medical treatments or when they were tested and laboratory results. I want to trust my medicine. So this is more my attitude also when it comes to the new technological ways to do the thing. So it depends what you do. Is it safe for the human beings, and is it safe for the societies as well? So digital decade, I like to always, this my bad humor, what decade? Because in Finland, they were looking at tick the box, tick the box, tick the box. There was not much to do. Okay, let's more seriously, in the previous panel, there was someone who said, my government still looks connections and digitalization as strategy. And I said, bad? Yes, because it's requirement. So if the strategy is to cover the countryside by fast connections, it's not the strategy. It's requirement for something more beautiful that you are doing. So that's why I think that we really should look at the content, what is happening with the digitalized, with the connections. So the connection is requirement. And then we need to build economies on that one. When I was thinking, for a short time, I was thinking this more on the global scheme and global way, that how to get Africa connected, how to get every single school in the world connected. But then I was a bit afraid to say, it's fun, you get the connections. It's fun you to have the Wi-Fi opportunity or there's a broad speed. But if you don't have any tool to build local economy on that one, if the only thing is that you can buy even Finnish Nokia network or Vodafone services and whatever American mobile, and then the content. But if the only thing what the SMEs get, you can advertise to people to find you with the location, it's very tiny share. So let's target for something higher. And there, I think what is so much needed is not only education and digital literacy, but also attitude. So this is not something that is so difficult. I have been legislating this 9 years here. I don't understand every single detail on the technical way, but so I have been doing on the climate for 20 years. I do remember CO2 and I understand something like that. I try to understand the data as a unit. And then people think, oh, not sexy at all. But CO2 has a price. Data is driving the world. So more people to keen on this tiny unit. Is it then on the quantum dimensions, or is it bipolar 1, 0, 0, 1, 0, whatever? That's not the issue, but it is there everywhere. And policymakers should be keen on that, how to build on that one. So for the single markets, my global view, Europe has to act is like so self-evident. So I don't know how much barriers in between one or another member states is interesting, but the interesting is that we do have broad shoulders to set sails up and sail, and we don't have to drift. That is what I think for the big picture on the digitalization. If we cannot benefit at all economically as Europe, a bit boring. But how can we? Many different answers. So have been keen all the time from the chips to networks to contacts and the pricing, the fairness, and then, but then it now continues really on the content, and there we have a good start.
Thank you. I think that to me, when you were like trying to summarize the very beginning, like first term was about infrastructure, the second one is about the content, but is the third term going to be about? To me, it's all going to be about implementation. We have spoken about infrastructure a lot. We have, I mean, several keywords were like launched today as well. I think that summarizes a little bit the complexity of the topic that we're trying to build, because how do you set a vision, which is important. You mentioned attitude, and I think that's a correct word, because you need to be brave in order to set a vision that is ambitious and is strategic at the same time, especially considering how the strategic aspect of the single market has been more present, especially in the last few years. So with this very last first round of interventions, I wanted to look directly at the panel and say, considering how we have heard like different views, is there any immediate reaction that you would have to any of your co-panelists? I see you thinking, so maybe I can just go directly to the questions. Unless you want to take the floor.
Phil, maybe it's my duty to respond, David, to what you said about the debate on OTT fair share, fair contribution. But I'm not going to labor the point. I just want to make a few remarks. First, in terms of impact assessment, absolutely. If there is a proposal coming forward from the Commission, it has to be subject to all of the standard procedures that any legislation would go through. We would not want to see that circumvented. We are confident that how we have positioned this is a proposal which is actually for the enhancement of the consumer experience on the internet. This is not about a transfer of value. This is about a creation of value. So we are confident that if you go through any impact assessment, you'll see that what we're trying to propose is about creating something which otherwise will not exist. When we start our financial year and we look at what we have to invest, is it right for European citizens that in any given year, we might have 30%, 40% of our investment budget will be taken up if overnight Netflix decides that every one of its movies becomes a hologram, right? Or if overnight Google decides that every one of its adverts that it runs on YouTube will be super high definition, ultra 4K, and it will be 35 seconds instead of 15 seconds. These decisions have massive implications for what we're able to invest in our network. And it's only right that this should be subject to an impact assessment. And what we are proposing is quite simple. We're not proposing we spent X, so you give us Y. No, there needs to be a commercial negotiation which looks at the impact very large traffic generators have on the deployment of infrastructure, and how there can be a requirement, firstly, to commercially negotiate, to come to co-creation, so that we can ensure that our investment is not made in ensuring that people in the cities can get access to super high definition, ultra hologram, whatever it might be, movies, but actually the people everywhere in Europe can get access, both businesses and consumers, to the next generation of technology, which otherwise they'll be deprived of. And we believe that will stand up to the scrutiny of any proper impact assessment. And the devil will be in the detail, but it is absolutely clear to us that this is not a sort of a cash grab. We'll take from one pocket and put into the other pocket. This is about creating value for European citizens and European businesses, which otherwise will be to the detriment of European competitiveness from the deployment of infrastructure. And I think that's a debate which will go on for a while, but there's been a lot of misinformation about what we're actually asking for. And I believe that what we are actually asking for stands up to scrutiny and will stand up to a proper impact assessment. In addition, we've been often challenged that, what you're trying to do is in contravention of net neutrality. Absolutely not. We are fully compliant with the Open Internet regulation, and we will continue to treat all traffic absolutely equally, as is the requirement under the Open Internet regulation. Incidentally, it is no longer, and you refer to, well, the debate was closed 10 years ago. Well, 10 years ago, if we're honest, we hold our hands up, the telco industry screwed up a little bit, right? We have to be honest about this. We did stupid things like trying to block Skype on mobile devices. There's a commercial reason for that. That's life, right? We learn from our mistakes, and probably Open Internet was a result of that. But it's not us that's doing the blocking anymore. So if you want to understand where you get good access to news information, you might find that I don't know if this is true. I've been told this. I'm only third party, but I've been told that when you go through X, can we say X now? Do we still have to say the platform formerly known as Twitter? Right? I think we can say X now. They are determining the quality of download you're getting on different types of news feeds. So this open internet concept is not there anymore, but it is not the telcos anymore that are stopping it, because we can't. We are bound by legislation to treat every bit of data equally. That's not the case from platforms, and that has to be resolved. So we are the good guys when it comes to open internet regulation. There are others that are no longer playing ball.
Yes, maybe also a little bit on the similar note, because starting from what Miapetra said, is this dichotomy, distinction between the time when we regulate infrastructure and the time when we regulate content. If we look at the situation nowadays, indeed, we can certainly, as consumers and as businesses, we can certainly rely on infrastructure having been sufficiently regulated, or at least we have the regulatory structures in place to make sure we have a relatively competitive market, which is delivering for the businesses and for the consumers, which is anyway where government and institutions have the ways to control. Where my feeling is that we are still not 100% there is rather on the area of the content. Okay, so again, this distinction between content and infrastructure. So if infrastructure is sufficiently regulated, is content sufficiently regulated? Because the issue is nowadays, as Miapetra said, I like to think it's not so much if we have reached all the schools with sufficient signals and through infrastructure, but what content are we going to teach our students? Do we have, going back to my previous points, do we have sufficient plurality, diversity of content, of sources of information? Or are we in a situation where we risk to be in the hands of a few gatekeepers that control the internet, that control the information, that have gated their own data spaces or internet spaces? And I'm afraid this is in the content area where we need more regulation or more enforcement to make sure we as businesses, as SMEs, really benefit from the single market. I'm also not sure if I look at David, you want to have an open and healthy internet ecosystem, and we are all for that. Now, I don't know if those tech companies are now part of an healthy ecosystem, because they are those who are gating the internet. So I'm not saying that the solution is them to give money to the telcos. I'm not saying that, but let's think about it. It might be part of the solution. I don't know. If you look at, if your objective is to make the internet more healthy, the problem I see is the presence of private companies which are monopolizing the internet. Government is also doing that at the global level, but in Europe, certainly we see the effects of the presence of companies. So how do we want to address that? This is if we want an healthy internet ecosystem.
Yes, I agree that these companies are too large. I agree that they are not controlling the internet, but they are capturing most of the attention of internet consumers, which is a little bit different. To some extent, they also try to control the infrastructure because they also have proposals that we are very much against what they say. But to answer to your points, Ben, first of all, in your previous intervention, you said it is important to ensure that there is a market failure before regulator intervenes. And here the regulator has been very clear. They don't see any market failure. So they don't see bad excess. There's no reason in principle to make any legislation, any additional obligations on this regard. The other thing you said about the transfer of value or economic value, let's make it clear. If telcos ask money to big tech is not going to take the money out of their pocket. They're going to take the money out of everybody's pockets or from other stakeholders. So it is an innocent perspective to think that consumers, we are not going to pay for this proposal ourselves. The other issue that has to be explained is that it's not Netflix pushing data to the networks, is the customers asking for this data, or Amazon or YouTube videos. It's the customers of telcos that are requesting also these videos. And let's not also forget that many of these companies are also investing in infrastructure themselves. So it is a complex debate that needs very well thought proposal, because the consequences can be breaking up the internet. I don't understand how telcos can have the face straight saying that this is not against net neutrality. It's totally against net neutrality. Because what happens if these negotiations do not meet an end? What they propose is that there is an external party, an arbitrator, that would come and fix the price. And what happens if the big tech says this price we're not paying? Would they cut the service of flowing the traffic from this big tech if they don't agree to the price? So all these questions need to be answered and be very well explained, because what we see is a huge threat to the internet as we understand it today. We see this debate not being only in Europe, and it has to be clear that other jurisdictions are looking at what Europe is going to do. So we are very much worried, and we wanted to share these worries with you.
Right. So I would like to go 1 minute back and react to what our MEP has said. Our MEP, Miapetra. Thinking a little bit ahead. Indeed, I would agree with you. Last commission, the focus on digital was very much on infrastructure, probably not enough. We're here because we still have a problem with the 5G rollout. This commission, big focus on content and on big tech. And then I hear you say, yeah, for next commission, probably focus on innovation, yeah, competitiveness, and then also going sectoral, because we have these big pieces of horizontal legislation. What does it now mean in the various sectors? And I think I very much agree with that analysis. That would be also my projection for what the future will hold. Now, on the first point, competitiveness, I also want to make a link to what Sebastiano is saying. I think plurality is a key word. And the reason why we came up with DSA and DMA is in order to safeguard plurality. A lot of regulation is actually pro-competitive regulation, or is designed to be pro-competitive. But it is not only by stopping the big that you will get there. You have to give wind in the sails of the small. And that's why competitiveness, more single market, more instruments to boost the competitiveness of the smaller, I think that's going to be a key of the future. And it's also in that sense that I understand also the messages from our president, with a big focus on industry, but also a big focus on competitiveness now with the report being entrusted to Draghi. And then indeed sectoral. And that's also our experience. I mean, I started my little intervention by drawing your attention to the need to make sure that our acquis, which is there, and which is often very sectoral, very nitty-gritty, stays fit for purpose in the digital world. And that will be also the work of the future. And that links in also with the message of implementation. Yes, we need to close now, quite quick, the AI Act and be the standard setters for the world. But then the work will start. What does that mean in all the very specific contexts that we know? Now, I'm not saying that for all these specific contexts we need to regulate, God forbid, yeah? Otherwise we will go down under our own weight at some point. But we need to dare to think about the hard questions and find the appropriate policy solutions to really go and drill deep into sectoral and real life problems, I think. And that, I think, is a big challenge for the new mandate as I see it.
Well, with this, I think it's about time that we open for a Q&A. But before, I would like to probably like summarize what happened in the last 2 moments. I think that certainly, as we advance, there's going to be multiple challenges, and perhaps like the only way to meet them it's through policy innovation. In policy innovation, I think that's an important topic that has been coming up more frequently. It's not a mix only of regulation; it's a mix of strategies. It's a mix of like different instruments that are like put in place in order to just like achieve a certain vision. I mean, debates like this will inevitably arise, whether it's telecom versus big tech, whether it's fair share, whether it's like net neutrality. This will become more frequent as digitalization advances. But I think that as a conclusion, it will all be around frameworks, about having the right frameworks in place, governance frameworks, regulatory frameworks, and that's certainly, like in my opinion, the necessary structures that we need to make sure that the targets are made. Whether we call them digital decade, and in which case, which decade are we speaking about, really depends on the country. I know Finland is heavily digitalized, but I know that I have to fly back to Spain in a couple of days to do things I cannot do still using the internet. So that's obviously like something really, really interesting. Before, whether we call it digital single market, because I've also heard some voices here in the panel saying perhaps it's not the best term. Appreciate the reference to football now that we are like World Cup winners. I have to say, but certainly I think that the importance is the importance of having a vision, of having the right strategy in place, and to having the right instrument and resources to be able to advance on it. So with this, we have 10 to 15 minutes. I know that probably like some people will have questions, and so please do not hesitate to raise your hand, whether it's the virtual hand or the physical hand for those who are joining us today in person. And now the floor is all yours. Which is interesting because at least online we have 6. So I'm not sure if somebody from the audience wants to come first here in person. All right, over to you. If you could introduce yourself or yourselves as you raise your hands.
Hello, and thank you very much for this very interesting discussion. My name is Philipp Lausberg. I'm also from the EPC. My question is going more in direction of the Commission, but everyone who feels he wants to take it up, please do so. It has been reported that infringement actions against single market infringement has fallen by 80% during the Juncker Commission. This, of course, also affects the digital single market. My question is, and of course, all the questions that you have been discussing, whether it's infrastructure or other aspects that are affected by unfair competition, what does the Commission intend to do about this, and what kind of solutions could there be? Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks a lot for this question, because indeed, enforcement of our key enforcement of single market rules, that's absolutely key. And I think you also refer to that. I'm not sure whether you can sort of measure performance under enforcement by just looking at statistics on the number of infringement cases. It's an easy parameter, right? You look at the number of infringement cases and then you say it goes up, therefore better enforcement, goes down, therefore less enforcement. I think that's too one-on-one. What we've been trying to do, first of all, there's still infringement cases and quite important ones. We try to prioritize in order to maximize the effect. At the same time, also, we've been trying to see, okay, fine, how can we partner up, in particular with the member states when it comes to enforcement? Because mind you, enforcement is first and foremost a national issue. And with that in mind, we have been putting forward the idea of single market offices, which are basically national administrations who themselves should not only be aware of obstacles, but should do the utmost in order to remove them. We have what we call the SMET. It's an awful acronym, but it stands for the Single Market Enforcement Tool. And that is actually a regular, not only dialogue, but work together with the national administrations, where we basically present a list of like the top whatever hurdles, and we then put on our collective boots in order to say, okay, what does it take in order to remove them? And out of that work, very concrete measures come. For instance, we learned through analyzing and to analyzing markets, to analyzing obstacles, through speaking to businesses, that actually the biggest hurdles are not sometimes the legislation, but are actually administrative practices, such as very, very slow and heavy permitting procedures. That was first discussed in SMET. And now in our key legislative initiatives, we take steps in order to make permitting faster. So I would say, yes, enforcement, that's absolutely key. Without proper enforcement, the single market is just a paper monster, doesn't exist in practice. But let us not measure that on the number of infringement cases. Here also policy innovation is what is needed and is what we have been trying to do. And I think also going forward to the future, and there I see the beauty of data analytics, etc., because we are more and more aware of where it hurts and we can make that public, etc., we can go even much further. Thanks.
Thank you very much. We have several questions from the audience online, so I will read one now, and then I will give the floor back to the audience here in person. We have a question from Klaus Klipp that asks the following. We have no common markets for finance, transport, labor, healthcare, education, etc. How could the digital single market work under such circumstances? It's not directed towards absolutely anybody in particular, so I'm just looking to all of you in case anybody wants to pick it up first.
You have to try. It's a good fact, and why it goes slowly on the digital sphere, which is not needing the physical solutions always, is always something that it's hard to understand. So maybe the languages are different and still based on the member states acting together on so many issues. So too good question to be answered in one way, but at least we can say that the digitalization should help that a lot. So then you have the kind of labor market rights, but then if you cannot find the job in another system, where to find it? So if not Googling, there are common agencies to work together and partnering. So on many issues. And yes, it was impossible when I was in the EU Committee of the National Parliaments. I was there 11 years before 9 years here. And we had somewhere on the working group the idea of that, how to buy the ticket to travel around Europe. And then the Commission promised to do something. And then I read last year again that Commission will propose something. And then we heard that the German railways are absolutely against the idea, that they're distributing the idea of the common timetables to put them together to exercise my right to travel. So, but nowadays Google Map is pretty good. So we don't deliver, someone else does it. So to buy online, and I can even use whatever. I'm sorry if I'm advertising something, but Omio app works quite fine to buy the tickets and so. So good ideas, good try, and we cannot deliver as Europe. So technology will be there more to help than prevent. And then we are losing again, maybe something for some other platforms that we were not able to build together, put the APIs so that the information could be more easily shared. So this is again the attitude or political will. I just must comment also that my first file ever was the digital single market strategy in 2014. Became friends with Kaja Kallas in Estonia nowadays. But then already then I said that how long shall we talk about only the digital single market? And nowadays it's even more valid to ask the digital society, because values plays an important role in everything we're doing.
We just add one additional perspective. I think maybe the question which implies how do you compare the degree of singleness, if I put in those days, of different types of sectors, and maybe isn't really the right question to ask, because the comparisons are very difficult. You know, what works in one sector won't work in another sector. I think the most important question to answer is the single market as complete as it possibly can be, taking into account the inherent limitations that we have, be it limitations of geography, physical time, distance, be it limitations on language, be it limitations on tax, which is still a national competence. So one has to look at all of the different elements which are components of whether you have a single market or not, and answer the question, is everything being done which is possible to break down the barriers to achieving as much as is possible? I think this is where in digital, the starting point must be that there are no barriers, there are no borders, everything should travel seamlessly. So the starting point should be that we should be going as fast and as quickly and as completely as we can. And actually, we are well underrepresented in terms of singleness compared to where we could be, given the nature of the inherent product that we're dealing with. And that should be the challenge for all of us, to say not are we better than transport, are we better than healthcare, but are we the best that we can be?
Thank you. We had a question here.
Hi, thank you. Okay. First of all, thank you very much. I am Leonardo Veneziani from Foretold. Thank you very much for this very interesting panel. I wanted to ask a question based on the innovation theme, which has been pretty recurrent in pretty much all the interventions from the panel. Especially considering that the Spanish presidency published a document on dependencies, saying that the EU is falling back in innovation in several fields, including AI. I was wondering, what is the mindset in that case? Especially considering the next commission, what should be the right mix of regulation in innovation for the next commission? Should it be a mix between private and public investments, or should there be no regulation at all? So what is the opinion of the panel in this case? Thank you.
That's probably the million-dollar question, how to move forward. Maybe Sebastiano?
For me, it goes back also to the previous question, because in the end, as Miapetra said, what we cannot deliver as regulators, let's say, maybe the market will be able to deliver it. And that's also more or less what Amaryllis said. We have to concentrate on really helping the companies which are there to benefit from what is available, and you mentioned competitiveness, and so that they are able to come up with the solutions that are needed. The Data Act, as Miapetra said, yes, we would like, actually, we have done that, or we should have that, but then it's up to the companies to come up with solutions to really change the world as we see it. And in my opinion, indeed, there should be a good balance between the two, so regulation and support to the market, the private-public partnerships. I am very much, a fan of certain interventions, because I think, especially if we want plurality in the market, we cannot just try to help the champions. There is this big, a drive by some people, especially in the Commission, to create the new champions, but we should also help the smaller ones because they are synonymous of a healthy ecosystem. And Yeah, so the focus should, in my opinion, should be on that. Going back to the fair share debate, I know if you don't like it, but we responded to the consultation. The money should not flow from company A to company B. The money should flow from company A to government, and then government should use it to support connectivity in SMEs. So this is what will make SMEs more competitive. And this is the role of the government, perhaps. So that might be a solution to that complicated discussion.
I very much agree that a lot of examples that I have also that the regulation is pro competitiveness, is a pro market. Without the European regulation, we would have more monopolies, and especially on this sector too. Like before 10 years already, the telcos used to be, I don't know if the audience is younger than me, so it was really state-owned companies, the building up then. So then there were first liberalization, but then also regulation. And then if we don't now regulate at all, and we still regulate too little the spectrum, for example, so then it's like, we will have the benefit, our public financing and ask much money from the spectrums, whereas I would love to model that pay less for the spectrum and invest a lot so that SME schools people can have access. So we have clear solutions that never work out in some countries, and they do in some, and they will try to legislate and do that for better markets to be there. So that's why it's quite nice. I'm from the Social Democrats, and then we have the liberals who don't like the system because monopolies are not the market economy, and normally liberals should have the market economy. And then the conservatives think that things should stay as they have been, and it's not good anymore. So they are very to do. So that's why we can even cross political parties to do things. So for me, it's a bit artificial to say that regulation, and was it even in the von der Leyen speech, that 25% away of regulation? That is very populistic from the president, if this is allowed to say that. And then also for the SMEs, when I was chair for the EU Affairs Committee, I invited especially the entrepreneurs in Finland to say that, can you please show me all these nasty regulation that is too difficult? It was mostly like bookkeeping or something very simple. So yes, it's coming regulation. So it's actually that you have some responsibilities too. And if someone now hates a lot their due diligence or something, so sorry, we will be there to protect the people. So in final stage, it's also that public side of the life matters. So maybe I'm being too much saying only good things about the companies. Also, I think in the last moment, it is that politicians are representing citizens and people to keep this continent livable, anti-war, anti-poverty, whatever, the pro-life, in a sense that also there are governmental duties. So my very in the Data Act was like, everybody hates to give any data to governments. That was like, you were crazy, and I was there alone to saying that, yeah, why cannot we do something? Yeah, in exceptional circumstances, you may ask companies to give their data. We have open directive data, so access on anything globally. We are enforcing that the governmental data, open access for every business to do whatever we have in public data. Only GDPR is limiting something. But then vice versa. Sorry, we have a virus. I should protect my citizens. Can you please, Benson, give some information? Redon was begging, and please give us something. So what about next pandemic, next national threat? Climate change, deaths in the traffic. And then suddenly it's like, no, business to government, it's too difficult part. So I also hope that at some point we will see that there is society, there is a state, there is very much of the nationalities and people that are formed in the on the organization that is called member state or European Union or a municipality. And if we are very strict to what the lobbyists now say, that never business to governments, only exceptional circumstances, we will get so old-fashioned public society that people hate it even more. If you don't get your taxation very soon, like Finnish people and Estonians, we were competing like 7 years ago. Does it take 5 minutes or 5 seconds to complete your taxation formulas? And if you don't allow the public sector also to get digitalized, I think that is not in the long run good for the businesses and societies all and all. So I don't know how many SME love to declare the most old-fashioned way, the paper stamp, okay, but signature was missing. Please come again tomorrow. So let also the public governance and the society get digitalized and do their task. And so this is also the public-private. What bothers me is not very well trusted and formed in all the details.
Thank you very much. We're slightly over time. So I would like to ask the panel if there's like any last quick final remarks. This is the time to do so. Otherwise, I will conclude the conversation today. Yeah.
To react, and also on the question on innovation, I think from all I've heard on the panel today, I'd like to answer your question with sort of an analogy which will show that I don't know anything about innovation, but I can talk about an analogy. And so the analogy is the car, right? So what we really want is cars to go fast. But the only way you get cars to go fast is if you have brakes, right? And that's how we have to think about the regulation. The innovation is how to make the car go faster. The brakes is the policy. It's the ensuring that we have a safe environment, that the car, when it needs to slow down, it can slow down. It also needs to we also need to understand that the regulation or the policy needs to differentiate between when you've got a nice straight road with good line of sight ahead of you when you're coming up to a bend. And that is where you need to get the balance right, because there are no absolutes. Everything is about a trade-off and how to balance different competing objectives. So I think about innovation as a car where you need to have the engine which goes fast and the brakes which allow you to slow down. But also, increasingly, you need to have the road underneath you, which I think is the digital infrastructure. To come back to what I said earlier, and I fully agree with some of the points Miapetra said there. But increasingly, it's not just the road underneath you. That road is the infrastructure, and it's also the data. Let's be honest, it's also the data now. And for Europe to really go forward, it's the combination of working out these trade-offs between the infrastructure, the engine, the brakes, the data, whether it's the new oil. I don't think it is a new oil, but it will help in this analogy. So let's call it the new oil. That's how we'll go forward, confidently in the right time, knowing when to slow down, when to speed up, and hopefully we do more speeding up than slowing down in the years ahead.
I must add here. And then what about the safety belt regulation to keep the people safe in the fast-going car? What about the emissions of the car that are destroying the nature and the globe? So there will be a lot of political debates for the next term as well on the innovations too.
I think we can have part 2 of this debate, right?
So I would like to probably call on the last thing that none of you mentioned, which is collaboration. So in that sense, I would very much like to thank every one of you for collaborating and being here with us today at the EPC. And thank you very much to all of you who have stayed until the end of this debate. I think that just like the last words means that we're going to do another one. So, so just pay attention to your inbox, and thank you very much for coming to the EPC.